The house was quiet that morning, too quiet for a home that was supposed to be full of life. Emily stood by the kitchen counter, stirring her coffee without really tasting it. The ticking clock filled the silence. Her husband Mark had already left for work before sunrise. The only other person in the house was his 17-year-old son, Ethan, who barely spoke to her. It had been a year since Ethan moved in after his mother passed away. Emily had tried to make the house feel warm for him, to make him feel less like a guest and more like family. But no matter how hard she tried, he remained distant, polite but detached. He kept to himself, stayed in his room most of the time, and answered her questions with short replies. That morning, when Ethan came downstairs, Emily greeted him softly. "Morning, Ethan." He gave a quick nod without looking at her and grabbed an apple from the counter. His eyes looked tired, almost hollow, as if he hadn't slept well. "Have a good day," she added, forcing a smile. "Yeah," he murmured. Before heading out the door, when the door closed, Emily sighed. It wasn't frustration, it was sadness. She didn't want to push him, but she wanted him to know she cared. Yet every time she tried, she hit a wall made of silence. Later that day, she went to clean the living room and noticed something she hadn't seen before. It's an old framed picture tucked behind a few books. She pulled it out and smiled softly. It was a photo of Ethan when he was little, sitting on his father's shoulders, both laughing under the sun. That image felt so different from the boy she saw now, the one who barely smiled and carried the weight of the world in his eyes. When Mark returned home that night, she showed him the photo. "He looks so happy here," she said. Mark glanced at it, his expression unreadable. Yeah, that was before everything changed. He was close to his mom, losing her. He trailed off, rubbing his temples. "It broke him, Em. I'm trying to give him space." "I know," she replied softly. "But maybe space isn't what he needs anymore?" Mark didn't answer. He was exhausted, and soon after dinner, he went to bed. Emily sat alone in the quiet house, staring at the photo again. She wanted to reach that part of Ethan, the one who smiled freely, who believed the world was still kind. The next morning, while she was folding laundry, she heard a clanging noise coming from the garage. Curious, she walked over and peeked inside. Ethan was sitting on the concrete floor, surrounded by tools and a broken bicycle. His hands were covered in grease, and his expression was one of frustration and defeat. "Need a hand?" she asked gently. He froze, startled, then quickly shook his head. "No, I'm fine." But the way his hands trembled said otherwise. Emily crouched down beside him anyway, ignoring his quiet discomfort. "You're trying to fix the chain wrong," she said lightly. "Here, let me show you." He hesitated but didn't stop her. She took the wrench and showed him how to loop the chain correctly. Her movements were calm and sure, the way her father had once taught her when she was young. After a while, Ethan looked at her curiously. "You actually know how to do this?" She smiled. "I used to fix bikes with my dad all the time. He said I was better than my brothers." That made him laugh just a little, but enough for her to notice. It was the first real laugh she'd heard from him since he'd moved in an hour later. When the bike was fixed, Ethan stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. "Thanks," he said quietly, still avoiding her gaze but sounding sincere this time. "Anytime," she replied. "You don't always have to handle things alone, you know." He didn't say anything, but she saw something soften in his expression. For the first time, it felt like a wall had cracked. Not much, but enough to let a bit of light through. In the days that followed, Ethan started coming out of his room more often. Sometimes he sat on the porch reading. Other times he joined her in the kitchen while she cooked. He didn't talk much, but his presence was enough. The silence between them no longer felt heavy. It felt comfortable. Mark noticed it too. One evening, as he put away his laptop, he said, "You're getting through to him, Em. I haven't seen him this calm in months." "I think he just needed someone to listen," she said. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about listening. It was about letting him see that she wasn't there to replace his mother, only to care for him in her own quiet way. A few nights later, Mark had to leave for a business trip. It was just her and Ethan in the house for the weekend. That Friday evening, they ate dinner together, the air filled with the soft hum of rain outside. She asked him about school, and for the first time he opened up, "I like art class." He admitted, playing with his fork. "It's the only place that feels calm." "But I'm not that good." Emily smiled gently. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to love what you're doing. That's enough." He looked at her thoughtfully. "You really think so?" "I do," she said. "Sometimes doing something that makes you feel alive is more important than doing it right." That sentence lingered between them. Something in his eyes changed, a flicker of hope or understanding, she couldn't tell. But it made her heart ache, knowing how long he'd been carrying his pain alone. After dinner, she found him sitting on the porch again, staring at the rain. She joined him quietly. "You miss her, don't you?" she asked softly. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Every day. She was the only person who really understood me." Emily swallowed hard. "I'm not her, Ethan. I can't be. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here, always." He turned toward her, his eyes glistening. "You remind me of her sometimes," he said. "Not because you look like her. It's just the way you care." Her throat tightened. "That's the kindest thing anyone's said to me." For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the rain hit the porch roof. The moment wasn't loud or dramatic. It was soft, human, and full of quiet emotion. That night, when Emily went to bed, she thought about how far they had come. The distance between them wasn't gone, but it had started to fade. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time since he'd moved in, she believed healing was possible. Yet deep inside, she also knew something had changed. The way Ethan looked at her tonight, it wasn't the same. It wasn't distant anymore. It was filled with something new, something fragile, something that would soon test them both in ways neither could predict. And Emily, lying awake in the quiet house, couldn't help but feel that their story had only just begun. Saturday morning arrived quietly, with sunlight spilling through the kitchen windows. Emily was already up, preparing breakfast, when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Ethan standing by the doorway, his hair messy, holding a mug of coffee. It surprised her. He never made coffee before. "I made one for you too," he said, setting it on the counter. She smiled softly. "Thank you. That's thoughtful of you." He shrugged, trying to sound casual, but there was a faint warmth in his voice. "You've been making breakfast for me all week. Thought I should do something too." It was a small moment, but it felt big. The air between them had shifted easier now. They ate together, talking about small things: his school, her garden, a movie she wanted to watch. The walls that had once separated them seemed thinner, replaced by a quiet understanding. Later that morning, Emily went outside to water the plants. The sky was clear and the air smelled like summer. Ethan came out holding a paintbrush and a small canvas. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked. "Of course not," she said. "It's your home too." He sat on the porch steps and began painting. Emily watched him for a moment. His strokes were careful, his focus deep. "You're good at that," she said. He smiled faintly. "It helps me stop thinking," she nodded. "Sometimes the best way to heal is to let your hands do the talking." He looked up at her. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said, meaning every word. Hours passed quietly, with only the sound of birds and the brush touching canvas. When he finally showed her the painting, her breath caught. It was the porch, with her watering the plants under the morning light. The details were soft but full of feeling. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He looked shy for a moment. "I didn't think you'd like it." "I love it, Ethan," she said. "You have a gift." That evening, they decided to watch a movie together. It was Mark's idea. Before he left, he'd told them to spend some time bonding. Emily made popcorn and Ethan set up the projector in the living room. When the movie started, she noticed him laughing more freely. The boy who used to hide behind silence now seemed alive again. Halfway through the movie, the power went out. The sudden darkness startled them both, then made them laugh. Emily lit a candle on the coffee table, its soft glow filling the room. "Well," she said, smiling, "I guess the universe wants us to talk instead." Ethan leaned back on the couch. "Talk about what?" "Anything," she said. Tell me what you dream about. What you want to do after high school? He thought for a moment. I want to travel. Paint somewhere far from everything. Maybe Italy or New Zealand. That sounds wonderful, she said. You should do it someday. He looked at her curiously. What about you? What did you want before all this? Emily laughed softly. Before I became a wife and stepmother, you mean? She looked down, thoughtful. I used to dream of being a writer, but life took a different road. You should still try, he said sincerely. You talk like someone who has stories to tell. His words touched her more deeply than she expected. She hadn't shared her dreams with anyone in years. That went to bed, she sat at the dining table and wrote for the first time in a decade just a few lines. But it felt like waking up a part of herself she'd forgotten. The next day, Ethan asked if she wanted to take a walk by the lake. It was something Mark often did with him before, but lately, work had kept him too busy. She hesitated, then agreed. The lake was calm, shimmering under the afternoon sun. They walked along the path, talking about everything and nothing, her favorite books. His old friends, the way life sometimes changes without warning. When they reached the pier, Ethan stopped and looked out at the water. You know, for the first time since Mom passed, I don't feel heavy, he said quietly. Emily turned to him, her heart tightening. I'm glad, she said. You deserve to feel light again. He looked at her, then really looked at her hand. Something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't wrong or strange, just a moment of deep understanding. Like two people who had carried too much pain finally found peace in each other's presence. They sat at the edge of the pier, the reflections rippling on the water. A cool breeze brushed against them, carrying the scent of pine and sunlight. Thank you, Ethan said suddenly. For what? Oh, she asked. For not giving up on me, he replied. For seeing me when I didn't want to be seen? Her throat tightened. You don't have to thank me. I care about you, Ethan. Always will. He smiled, and for a moment, he looked like the boy in the photo she'd found, the one full of life and laughter, as they headed back. The air between them felt warmer, quieter, but full of meaning. Emily didn't realize it then, but something had changed forever. That evening, when she was cleaning up after dinner, she noticed a small envelope on the counter. Her name was written on it in Ethan's handwriting. She opened it slowly, curious. Inside was a sketch-up portrait of her sitting on the porch, reading a book. Underneath it, he'd written, You help me see color again. Her heart ached at the sweetness of it. She wanted to tell him how much it meant to her, but he'd already gone upstairs. She placed the drawing carefully in her journal, knowing she'd treasure it forever. Later that night, as she sat by the window, she thought about how life had a strange way of bringing people together, sometimes through pain, sometimes through simple kindness. She never expected to become this close to Ethan, but now she couldn't. Imagine her days without their quiet talks, shared smiles, and unexpected laughter. Yet deep down, she felt an unease she couldn't name. The bond they shared was pure, built on care and trust. But she could sense the delicate line between comfort and confusion. The next morning, as she made breakfast, she caught him looking at her differently, longer, softer. Not with teenage uncertainty, but with something deeper, something she wasn't sure he understood yet. She looked away quickly, pretending not to notice, her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself it was nothing, that it was just his way of showing gratitude. But part of her knew things were changing again, in ways neither of them had expected. That night, when she turned off the lights and went to bed, she couldn't sleep. The house felt different now, alive, in a way that scared her a little. The connection that once felt like family now carried something more fragile, more complicated. She closed her eyes, telling herself it was just in her head. But somewhere in her chest, a quiet truth stirred. This weekend had changed everything. Days passed quickly after that weekend. The house didn't feel as quiet anymore. There was laughter in the kitchen again, the sound of footsteps on the stairs, the smell of freshly brewed coffee every morning. Ethan's new routine, Emily noticed. The small changes, he started leaving his door open, asking for her opinion on his sketches, even helping with chores without being asked. It all felt so natural, yet something beneath the surface began to stir an emotion she couldn't quite name. One afternoon, while organizing old boxes in the attic, Emily found a framed picture of Mark, Ethan, and his late mother. The image froze her. They looked happy and touched by loss, untouched by time. She dusted it off gently and decided to give it to Ethan. When she knocked on his door, he was sitting at his desk, painting again. "I found this," she said softly, holding the picture out. He looked at it for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. "I forgot we even had that," he said, taking it carefully. "Mom used to hate that photo. She said my hair looked like a mop." Emily laughed quietly. "You both look wonderful." He smiled faintly. "Thanks, Emily. You've helped me remember her without the sadness. That's something I didn't think was possible." Her chest tightened. "I'm glad. She'd want you to live fully." He nodded, then looked at her, his eyes lingering just a little too long. "You make this place feel alive again," he said, his tone sincere. Emily froze for a second, unsure how to respond. It was a kind thing to say, but the way he said it carried a warmth that made her heart race. She quickly smiled, thanked him, and left the room. But her thoughts didn't leave with her. That evening she stood by the window as rain poured outside. Ethan was in the living room, sketching quietly. She watched him from a distance. Realizing how much he had changed in the past few months stole her more confident, less guarded. She was proud but also afraid that their bond was turning into something neither of them had intended. When Mark called from his business trip that night, Emily felt an odd guilt she couldn't explain. He asked how things were, and she said everything was fine, better. Ethan's been wonderful, she said. "That's great to hear," Mark replied cheerfully. "You're good for him, Em. I always knew you would be." Her heart sank a little at his trust. She wanted to keep things simple, but emotions didn't always listen to reason. The next day, Ethan came home from school in an unusually quiet mood. She could tell something was wrong. "Rough day?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Some kids were talking about Mom. They said stuff that wasn't true." Without thinking, Emily reached out and touched his arm. "Hey, look at me. People say things they don't understand. You know who you are. That's what matters." He looked up at her, his eyes soft but filled with something deeper. "I don't think I've ever had someone defend me like that," he said quietly. Before she could respond, the moment was broken by the sound of thunder outside. They both turned toward the window. The storm had gotten worse. Emily smiled faintly, trying to change the subject. "Looks like we're in for a long night." They ended up sitting in the living room, candles lit as the power flickered. It reminded them of that night with the movie. They talked for hours about life, about Mark, about what it means to start over. At one point, Ethan asked, "Do you ever feel like you became someone's story by accident?" Emily looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "I mean, you came into our lives when everything was falling apart. Now it feels like you're the reason things make sense again." She felt a rush of emotion, but kept her tone calm. "Sometimes people meet for reasons they don't see at first. But every connection has to stay honest and good, Ethan. That's what makes it last." He nodded slowly, as if trying to understand the weight of her words. Later, as she stood to put away the dishes, she caught him watching her from the couch. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a kind of quiet admiration. She quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the candlelight. Her heart beat faster than she wanted it to. That night she wrote in her journal again. Her words came out hurried, emotional. "He's growing up, he's healing, but I have to remember he's Mark's son. I must never blur that line." The next morning, she tried to create more space, politely declining when he offered to help with chores or asked her to join him for lunch. Ethan noticed immediately. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked one afternoon. "No," she said quickly. I just think you should spend more time with friends your age. You've been home too much lately? He frowned. I like being here. You make it feel like home. Her chest ached at his honesty. That means a lot. But I want you to experience the world, Ethan. I don't want you to depend on me too much. He looked hurt but nodded. Okay, that's what you want. For the next few days, he stayed distant. He spent more time outside, hanging out with classmates, and coming home late. Emily told herself it was good healthy, but she couldn't ignore the empty feeling his absence left behind. One evening, she heard the door open softly. Ethan walked in, soaked from the rain, his expression unreadable. You were right, he said, voice low. I went out, but it didn't feel the same. I don't fit in out there anymore. She handed him a towel, her voice gentle. You will, in time. It just takes practice. He looked at her, his eyes tired but full of sincerity. You always know what to say. It's because I care, she said. He hesitated, then whispered, I know. That's what scares me. The words hung between them like unspoken truth. Emily felt her chest tighten. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was just confusion. That he was young and still healing, but the moment was too fragile. She finally said softly, Ethan. Sometimes when people care deeply, feelings can get mixed up. It's natural. But what we have is something good and honest. Let's keep it that way. He nodded slowly, eyes down. I don't want to lose what we have. You won't? She promised. He smiled faintly and walked upstairs. When she was alone again, Emily exhaled deeply, realizing how close they had come to crossing an invisible line. The bond they shared had become something fragile and precious. A kind of love that wasn't romantic but still full of emotion that night. As the rain quieted outside, Emily sat by the window, writing one final line in her journal. Sometimes love isn't about claiming someone, it's about guiding them back to themselves. And though she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for sure: she would always care for Ethan. Not as something forbidden, but as a heart she had helped heal. But the next morning, a letter arrived that would change everything. The morning sunlight poured through the kitchen window when Emily found the letter resting on the counter. Her name was written on the envelope in Mark's familiar handwriting. He hadn't mentioned anything about sending a letter, so curiosity pushed her to open it immediately. As she read the first few lines, her heart began to race. Mark's words were warm but filled with something unexpected. Emily, I've been offered a long-term project in Seattle, 2 years minimum. I know it's sudden, but it's an incredible opportunity. I want you and Ethan to think about joining me here. I can't imagine being away from both of you for that long. Emily set the letter down, feeling her mind spin. 2 years, moving across the country, leaving the life they had rebuilt here. Her first thought wasn't about logistics, it was about Ethan. How would he react? He had just started feeling grounded again. Uprooting him now could undo all the progress they'd made. Ethan came down the stairs a few minutes later, his hair messy, a soft smile on his face. Morning, he said, reaching for coffee. But he noticed the expression on hers immediately. What's wrong? She handed him the letter. He read it silently, his eyes narrowing. When he finished, he leaned against the counter, quiet for a long time. So he wants us to move. He said finally, yes, she replied carefully. He wants us to be with him in Seattle. Ethan sighed, staring at the floor. You'll go, right? Emily hesitated. Ethan, it's not that simple. Your school, your art program, you've built something here. He shook his head. You should go, Emily. You and Dad should be together. That's how it's supposed to be. His tone was calm, but his eyes said otherwise. Emily felt a sting of sadness. Ethan, you're part of that, supposed to be. This isn't just about your father and me. It's about what's right for you too. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've already done more for me than anyone. Maybe this is your turn to be happy. For the next few days, the air between them was different, polite, but distant. Emily busied herself with phone calls, trying to understand what the move would mean. At night, she'd hear Ethan quietly pacing in his room or sketching late into the morning. Something told her he was preparing to let her go. One evening, she found him outside on the porch, a sketch pad on his lap. The sunset painted his face gold and pink. "That's beautiful," she said softly, sitting beside him. He showed her the drawing. It was a portrait of her. Not perfect, but raw and full of emotion. "It's how I'll remember you," he said. Her heart broke a little. "Ethan, you don't have to remember me. I'm not leaving forever." He shook his head. "You changed my life, Emily. You made me want to live again. That's something I'll never forget, no matter where you go." She reached out and took his hand gently. "And you gave me hope, Ethan. You reminded me what it means to care deeply for someone without expecting anything in return." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "I'm scared I'll lose that." "We won't," she said. "Real connections don't fade, they just grow in new directions." It was the last real conversation they had before everything moved quickly. Mark returned within a week, full of energy about the new job. He hugged Ethan tightly, proud of how much he'd matured. Emily watched the two of them together and realized that this moment was what she had worked for. A father and son who could finally see each other with love again. Still, her heart felt heavy when she saw Ethan avoid her gaze. He smiled when spoken to, but rarely initiated conversation. She knew he was preparing himself for goodbye. On their last night in town, the three of them went out for dinner. The atmosphere was cheerful, but every laugh felt slightly forced. When they returned home, Ethan went upstairs first. Mark stayed behind to finish a call. And Emily went to check on Ethan. His room was half-empty sketchbooks, stacked neatly, suitcase by the door. On his desk lay another envelope, this one with her name written in pencil. She opened it slowly. Inside there was a single page with his handwriting, "Emily. Thank you for showing me what kindness really looks like. You gave me a home when I was lost. You made me believe people can care without expecting anything. I don't know what love is supposed to feel like, but I think what we had was close, pure, honest, and safe. Don't ever think you didn't matter to me. You changed my world." Her eyes welled with tears. She didn't need to say anything back. She just folded the letter carefully and placed it in her journal, where her words about him had lived for months. The next morning, as they loaded the car, Ethan hugged her tightly. Not a quick embrace, but one that spoke 1,000 words. "Take care of him," he whispered, meaning his father. "I will," she whispered back. "And you keep painting. Keep living." He nodded, stepping back, his eyes bright but steady. "I will. You'll see my name somewhere one day." "Already do," she said, smiling through tears as the car drove away. She looked out the window and saw Ethan standing there. Wind blowing through his hair, a faint smile on his face. It wasn't goodbye, it was a beginning. Months later in Seattle, Emily often thought about that time. Mark was happy in his new job and life found its rhythm again. But sometimes when she sat by the window at night, she'd open her journal and read that letter. It reminded her of something timeless, the kind of bond that doesn't fade even when people move apart. Then, one spring morning, a package arrived. Inside was a painting vibrant, full of color. It was a scene of their old house in autumn, golden leaves scattered across the yard. Attached was a note for the woman who taught me how to see the beauty in the world again. "Ethan." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with quiet pride. She hung the painting in the living room, right above the fireplace. When Mark asked who painted it, she said simply, "Someone who found his way." That night, as the fire crackled softly, Emily wrote one last entry in her journal. Sometimes love doesn't have to be romantic to be powerful. Sometimes it's the kind that restores, rebuilds, and lets go. I helped him heal, and in return, he reminded me what it means to feel alive. She closed the book, placed it beside the painting, and exhaled deeply. The chapter had ended not in heartbreak, but in peace, and though miles now separated them,